Austin, I know that a lot of franchisees are using a bookkeeper. Why is the Flywheel package different for Scenthound franchisees?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've done is we've basically custom catered our package basically to work with all of the softwares that Scenthound franchisees are already working with, right? So every Scenthound franchisee is going to be in MyTime. Every Scenthound franchisee has to push data into Profit Keeper. And so one of the things we've kind of custom catered it to is to kind of take all of that off of the franchisee's plate and for us to just kind of like handle that in the background like clockwork. So basically what we do is we're downloading, we have access into MyTime, and we're downloading reports out of MyTime really to track a couple different things. First one is the credit card spend. So every day that those credit cards are being transferred over into QuickBooks, we're reconciling that data to make sure there's no discrepancies between what MyTime is reporting from a revenue standpoint and what QuickBooks is like revealing on the revenue side on your P&L. And the second thing is this cash reconciliation discrepancy. So we're pulling that same data out of MyTime to say like how much was reported from a cash received in the stores, no matter how many stores you have. And then what we're doing is we're saying, okay, this is the amount of money that was actually deposited into the actual bank to make sure that there's not cash leaving out the back door. I think that's probably a big thing that maybe some Scenthound franchisees are trying to figure out, like how do we monitor or manage this?
Yeah.
And we've basically built a system around it to say every week we're constantly looking in to say what deposits have come in.
Right.
How does that line up to what's actually reported in MyTime?
Yeah, and I think to take that even further, like for us, we could deposit cash every day, and we could probably have a handle on, you know, what MyTime said was collected and what we deposited every day, and it would never get out of hand. That would be a lot of effort for us to
exactly.
do. You know, we only have one person, and other than me, that makes cash deposits, and so for them to have to spend, you know, whatever, hour and a half of their day to make those deposits would be
go to the
a waste
bank.
of time.
Yeah.
You know, especially because we only collect tips. We don't collect a lot of payments in cash. So
Yeah, exactly.
I think your report and the cash reconciliation allows us to make bi-weekly or even monthly deposits and still feel confident that we'll notice any discrepancies at the end of the month.
Yeah,
And we can then go back to the day that we find the day that the discrepancy was, and we can research it and figure out what's going on.
Yeah, so basically from our standpoint, you'll get that report at the end of the month once we close the books and say, like, here is the discrepancy.
Right.
And obviously, when you dive into the level of detail there, sometimes you're depositing something on the 2nd for tips that were collected on the 28th and 29th of the month, right? So we have those conversations just to make sure, like, hey, just because there's discrepancies there, here's the reason why. But if there's kind of higher variances there, then we can kind of go into that level of detail to feed you the data that you need to kind of research that.
Right. And like, that's a good example. We've started a policy of making deposit on the very last day of the month so that we don't deposits from the prior month and mess up that report. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the other things we do in this base package is we basically pull all of those TSYS transactions that are coming in every single day, and we are splitting those out into the different revenue streams that are reported in Zoho Analytics. So a lot of times what most franchisees do, if they're not doing this, is they're having to go into Zoho Analytics to see like what are our different income breakouts. But then on the P&L and QuickBooks, it's a completely different thing. It just has like a general revenue line item or however you're allocating those TSYS transactions. And so for us, it's very important to like for you to see in the P&L in QuickBooks, here's all the different levels of income and where that's coming from, whether you're selling products or grooming, memberships and that whole deal.
Not just a single deposit from the credit card processing.
That's
company.
Right. That's right. And so one other thing that we do for franchisees is we're actually collecting all of those Scenthound statements that you get at the end of the month, whether you're ordering things off the order portal or all the royalty fees. So we're breaking those out. We're looking line item by line item each one of those statements, and we're putting those in the right buckets. So we're putting them in the royalty fees. We're putting them in the brand and the marketing fees. We're putting in the technology fees. Mm-hmm. And then everything that you're buying on that order portal, we're putting it either into shop supplies or equipment or possibly even capitalizing on the balance sheet. So we're constantly analyzing all of those different line items to make sure that it's being allocated correctly every single month.
Yeah, and I guess the benefit that y'all are adding is there's no good way to break out those fees. Otherwise, you're just getting hit with a bill at your bank account because Scenthound is drafting money out of your bank account.
Exactly right.
And your bank account is just showing Scenthound services or Scenthound franchising. And so you can't just take those line items and put them in the P&L.
Yep.
You need to go into the statements and actually determine what are those line items so that you can properly put them on the account.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Because if you're not doing that, then you're literally just going to see a Scenthound Services line item on your bill, and it's just going to be $2,000. You're going to be like, what is that for?
Right. Okay.
And so we're taking that $2,000 and we're splitting it out between all of those different buckets.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's the credit card deposits that we're getting.
That's right.
That you're putting into the right buckets, and then it's also these charges from Scenthound Services and Scenthound Franchising that you're putting into the right buckets.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. So then inside of that same package as well, we're also providing basically the data import into Profit Keeper. So what we're doing is making sure that mapping is correct based on these P&L and balance sheet line items from QuickBooks. And we're mapping that correctly inside of Profit Keeper for each one of your stores. And our team's actually logging into Profit Keeper on your behalf to make sure that data is synced and synced accurately. So then it's being submitted to corporate on a timely manner every single month once we close the books.
Yeah. And because you have the Scenthound chart accounts, the import into Profit Keeper should be pretty seamless because the
absolutely.
Profit Keeper matches the Scenthound chart of accounts. And if you're doing your job well here, then it makes that easy.
That's exactly right. So we're matching those 4-digit codes exactly to how Scenthound has their standard chart of accounts out there.
Right.
And we're just seamlessly basically mapping those things together.
Awesome. Yeah, why don't we talk about the way that we handle tips on our financial statements?
Yeah, so what we're doing is we're basically going into Zoho to see what the tips came from for that week. And rather than put them in revenue and actually inflate revenue per store, we're actually putting it as a liability inside the balance sheet. Because basically what's going to happen is you're collecting these tips and then you're paying those tips right back out to the employees. And so we want to see at the end of the day and at the end of the month how much was collected versus how much was paid back out as a liability on the balance sheet. And then we balance that out at the end of every month. So nothing's ever inflated on the P&L. It's always represented on the balance sheet.
Gotcha. So if I'm hearing you correctly, instead of counting tips as revenue and as an expense in labor and zeroing it out on the P&L, you're just putting it as a line item on the balance sheet.
That's right.
And
Yeah,
you're collecting those tips from customers on employees' behalf, and then you're paying them out each week when you're paying payroll effectively.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. So we're pulling that data from these payroll reports that we're collecting from Scenthound. Or from the Scenthound franchisees, right? And we're tying those things out to make sure the tips are always going on the balance sheet and they're not ever inflated or shown on the P&L.
Awesome. Typical franchisee will already have access to their store's monthly P&L balance sheet and then the data they're getting out of Zoho Analytics from the franchisor.
Yeah.
What else are you providing that adds value to franchisees?
I think the big thing we provide for these franchisees is that in Zoho and in my time, you're never going to actually see the full picture of the business, right? Because you're never actually going to see the cost or expenses that you're accruing to have people in the store, running the store, and all the overhead that it takes to do that. And so for us, we're giving you an accurate picture of your business because we're producing this P&L on this balance sheet every month for you to review. And then on top of that, what we've done is we actually built out a KPI dashboard essentially for metrics that we think, and you and I have talked about this, that you should care about as a franchisee, right? And so in those metrics, what we're doing is we're looking at average daily revenue versus like average daily labor spend. And so we're constantly tracking, obviously for you, the big thing is, one of the big things you can keep your hand on to really determine the profits is the labor spend at each of these stores. And so we want to see those metrics. And when we get it on an average daily revenue and average daily labor, the reason we do that is because if you're running payroll every single week, there might only be 4 payrolls in February, but then 5 payrolls in the month of March. And so we want to get an accurate picture of how much spend you're actually spending on labor for that particular month, and then breaking that out on a daily side so you can get those true labor efficiency numbers. So really what we're looking at on these customized metrics is your labor efficiency. So we're looking at in-store labor efficiency. We're looking at management labor efficiency. We've even gone to the point with you too of like diving into the level of detail of scent techs versus groomers versus managers.
Yeah.
And so having that level of detail I think is very important. And you're never going to get that out of Zoho or My Time.
Yeah.
And we spend the time to actually allocate those things correctly so you can see those things.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, really one of the other things that I think is important for you to see is actual movement of cash, right? And so like for you, that's something you're also not going to get on a standard P&L because you're not representing what loans you have and what things that you're having to pay off from a debt service standpoint on the P&L. So we're going to give you this line item that's basically your net cash after debt service. So you can truly see what did each of these stores actually make and deposit in your bank rather than just maybe an inflated profit when you're seeing on that net profit side.
Gotcha. Okay. So the things that I find a lot of value that y'all produce are these metrics that, again, incorporate elements of cost that I would not be able to create in Zoho. And like this, I think this average daily revenue and average daily revenue and average daily labor is a perfect example. And you could even get an average daily gross profit from that number.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's a perfect example of something that is really actionable. And I think about those metrics as metrics that we can start to incentivize our team with.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't have a metric that you feel is 100% true, you know, from month to month or apples to apples, then you're not going to be able to tie a bonus to that number.
That's right.
And so I feel really comfortable with this average daily revenue, average daily labor, because and you know, actually tying, you know, an incentive plan to that if we wanted to, because that's a number that is not impacted by some months with 24 days of revenue, some months with 23, and the 4 weeks versus 5 weeks payroll. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just compare it to like sports, right? If you're on the football field and you see a scoreboard that's not accurate, how in the world do you know if you're winning or not, right? And so it's our job to produce a scoreboard that's simple, that you can also know is true.
Yeah.
And so then you can justify if you're winning or losing and base bonuses off of that.
Yeah. I think the other view of the financials that you produce for us that is helpful, and this may seem simple, but you have a view in the report on, you know, this month versus last month for each store so that we can see the major changes side by side. You also have a view of trailing 13 months P&L for each store so that we can see trends, but also what do we do this month last year, see if there's any seasonality. And then you have a view that is the combination of all stores. And again, this is something that I could do pretty simply with copy pasting the P&Ls, but you have it all right there, and I don't have to do any work. And I pull it up, and it's the views that I want to see. So
absolutely.
You know, may only add 30 minutes of my time back, but that adds up every month. So.
Yeah, for sure. And especially, you know, once you get to these larger store numbers, right? I mean, because most likely you're probably going to have a separate account for each of these stores if you're operating in QuickBooks Online.
Right.
So it's literally this cumbersome, like, let me go in and export and put all this stuff into one single source, and then you got to build formulas to push all that data in. And so we try to do whatever we can to really save you time. So we get you the data that you need as quickly as possible so that you can make actual steps for your stores based on the data that you know is accurate.
One of the things you've done for us, which has been tremendously helpful, is you take the labor and you break it out into manager labor, manager and training labor, scent tech and training labor, groomer and training labor. Now we have to categorize our employees into those buckets so that you have the data set to be able to build that into the P&L. But if we do our job and then we provide you that information, then you can build that granularity into the P&L. And Scenthound is a business that is labor dependent. It is how we make money or don't make money. And so before, it was one big bucket of labor, and managing that was more difficult. It took some research projects for me to dig in and be like, why was labor so high last month? Well, it looks like we had 2 people training to be a groomer. That makes sense. It looks like we had an extra manager that hit the books. Now I can see that very clearly on the P&L. Another like quick, rule of thumb that I'll do is I'll look at each stores and I'll see what is the total training budget last month across all the stores, and that's the cost of our turnover. If we're not growing and we have a giant training budget, that means that we have had a lot of employees quit. We just hired a bunch of employees. Yeah. And so that's like a tax. That's like a turnover tax on our business. And so I didn't have that insight really until being able to break that out into those different buckets. So I think that's, something that you really helped us design and implement. And I don't think that you're going to get that level of detail from just a normal bookkeeping type service.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is a lot of like sensitive information. How do you think about keeping that secure?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of our first line of defense is QuickBooks Online, right? So like everybody we work with is going to be working inside of this QuickBooks Online platform. And so really what we tell people is we're QuickBooks experts. And so we go in there and we're leveraging everything inside of QuickBooks Online. So we're not doing anything really outside of like from your bank syncing or any of those things. We're not doing anything outside of that. And
let me just ask you, if I'm not on QuickBooks Online, can you still work with me?
What we would do is we would basically say we would handhold you from whatever platform you're currently using into QuickBooks Online.
Okay.
So whether it's Xero or QuickBooks Desktop or any of these other platforms, we can literally export that data that you have there and walk you into QuickBooks Online.
And then you would just basically take over
That's
the
exactly
QuickBooks
right.
Online. Okay.
That's right. And then on the flip side, one of the big things that we do is we get read-only access to the places where we need to pull statements from. Because the last thing we want to do is burden you or anybody on your team to say like, hey, we need your credit card statement to reconcile your bank account, or we need your bank statement. And so you would basically work with people to give us that read-only access, so we have no ability to make transfers or push money out of your accounts. We would literally just go on there, be able to pull statements so that we can just make this happen in the background. So you feel comfortable. There's nothing we can do inside your bank, but we're just pulling that data so that we can make sure everything's accurate inside of QuickBooks Online. So then the third thing we're doing is we're basically have a customer portal. So like during your onboarding phase, essentially that's how we're gathering important data from you for things that we need access to, for things that we need to kind of tap into your data for. And so you would have a specific username and login that's password protected to you to this portal that you would log in there. And that's how we would get a lot of your information submitted to us initially to get you up and running inside of our processes.
Gotcha. Tell me your approach to account management and customer service and how that might be different from other bookkeepers.
Yeah, absolutely. So with Flywheel, you basically get a dedicated account manager. It doesn't matter if you have one store or if you have 20 stores. You're going to get a dedicated account manager that knows your stores and knows your performance. So they're the ones producing financials for you every single month. They're the ones reconciling your bank accounts. They're the ones actually doing those things, going into Zoho, going into MyTime, that are actually pulling that data for you. So they really start to understand you and your stores. And so they're not flopping back and forth to somebody that's randomly going to close your books and send you things that are not in the right buckets, because they're learning your business because they're paired directly with you. And so for us, that's very important because we always want to provide a level of customer service that you most likely are never going to get with some software that can basically do AI bookkeeping, right? And so like there's tons of platforms out there, and feel free to go use those things. Our big thing is that you're going to get a dedicated person that's going to respond to your emails within a day every time. And they're going to be somebody that's just literally a video call or an email away that knows your account, rather than you having to go figure out yourself and get on some 1-800 number to go talk to somebody that's most likely has nothing about your account and going to create a ticket to go do all those things.
And I can speak to that personally. There's always one-off things. There's always, like, we had a landlord say, hey, we never got paid, what happened? And I reached out within a few hours. You basically sent the invoice that said, hey, we actually did pay them. It was wired to their account. It wasn't a mailed check. And you sent that directly to the landlord, and they were like, oh, thanks for the clarification. That was probably saved me a research project if I had to do that with anyone else, Or another example is recently corporate sent us an email saying, hey, these transactions look weird in Profit Keeper. Please go address. I just forwarded that along to our account manager at Flywheel, and they took care of it, and they emailed corporate for me saying it's done. And that's just an example of kind of what's included and what I think Flywheel has in their customer service.
Yeah, in addition to that customer service lane, essentially what we are is a company of systems and processes. I really tell people we're not an accounting firm, we're a company of systems and processes, because when you think about the nature of accounting, it's very cyclical and things are just very repeatable every single month. So our account managers are always going to be extremely in the weeds of these systems and processes, and they're just running this checklist, this playbook over and over and over again to provide this like rinse and repeat factory level delivery to you every single month. The way I've kind of described it to people is that I kind of feel like we're the offensive line, where it's just like we consistently do our job over and over and over again to help the whole team move down the field. And so like, if we mess up, it's really big and you see it. And so we try to be very, very detailed when how we do our processes so that our account manager is just doing it accurately every single time. And we can even deliver that checklist to you as well to say, like, here's what we do for you over and over and over again. So you can see, did we do every single thing for you for every single store to keep things very organized and detailed and efficient.
It's almost like in between outsourced CFO and bookkeeping. It's a bit more. It's a bit more than just your standard monthly books. It's somewhere in between there, like doing more of like what I say is like financial operations.
Yeah, exactly.